And I just enjoy hearing such great, astute political commentary cloaked in a velvet voice that is almost like a political Mr. Rogers. I love it. You're just a dream
I
to
love
work
it.
with.
Welcome to this latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. The anxiety that comes with the realization that the most powerful military and economic nation is being run by a raving maniac has finally reached a global level. That's the anxiety. It is now way beyond the fear of NATO being abandoned by the stalwart ally that helped keep the Soviet Russian aggression contained for 80 plus years. The Middle East has not seen this much turmoil since Lawrence of Arabia got involved over a century ago. The recent American excursions in Afghanistan and Iraq were pretty much limited to those two countries, but this latest American Israeli adventure has already sustained casualties in over a dozen countries and counting. It also seems pretty clear that Cuba is on the list as to what comes next. So we are about to discuss how scary this actually is with Lenny Young and Doug Heinrichs. Welcome, panel.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Every time I hear a talking head on TV talk about this war, the preface is always about shedding no tears for the dead Ayatollah, who himself was a murderous despot. So the Israeli strike that killed him and started this thing is somehow, somewhat, some way justified because it is always a good idea to rid humanity of a very bad guy, right? Can you appreciate that logic, or do you see it through a different lens? Doug, what do you think about that idea? We got to kill those bad Ayatollahs all the time, every chance we get.
Well, I think it's a problematic way to operate for several reasons. One is um, who's the bad guy is a matter of opinion, always. And so you can always find somebody who would argue that you're the bad guy. So it's basically an open invitation to kill one another, right? So I think you have to have some precedent that you don't do this sort of thing. And it's been a basic law principle of international law for a long time that you don't assassinate leaders of other heads of state of other countries, right? That's been blown out now. Seems to me Trump has given an open invitation to take him out by from any other country who decides he's a bad guy, right? I mean, I think this is a very this is the at the international level. This is equivalent of uh, if you diss me, I'm going to pull a gun out and shoot you in the parking lot, kind of thing. It's that primitive, and I think it's an incredibly dangerous precedent. It's unjustified, and I think it opens the world to just, taking each other out randomly, because in somebody's view, everybody's a bad guy. There's somebody who thinks you're the bad guy. And hey, why is their opinion any worse than ours?
Hey, Lenny, he's a bad guy. He's my enemy, so it's okay to kill him. What's wrong with that
Well,
one?
I mean, with that same logic, I don't know, Vladimir Putin could say that the president of Ukraine is a bad guy and wants to take him out. Or the Chinese government can say that the president of Taiwan is a bad person and wants to take them out. It is a it's not a very good moral standard. It can be instantly turned against us in terms of propaganda, and it's also very short-sighted because the Ayatollah was in his 80s. He was not long for this world anyway. So we've gone from someone who is more or less, universally reviled by the rest of the world to a martyr, at least to, the most radical people in his own country, and perhaps a martyr for other Shiites throughout the Middle East.
So you think it might have backfired?
Oh,
The
no, definitely. It was very short-sighted, that's for
mm.
sure.
A persistent rhetorical thought line since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack has been, if you don't support the Israeli policies of the Netanyahu government in its treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza, then you must be anti Semitic and hate all Jews. The Trump administration has been using this concept in much of its anti woke, anti DEI campaign against some major universities, such as Harvard and Columbia, by denying these schools millions of already approved research grants until they bend the knee by submitting anti First Amendment language in new school policies designed to punish students who dare speak out in favor of the Gazan residents who have been suffering since the start of the war. Do you believe that empathy for the Palestinians renders one to be anti Semitic? And how do you answer accusations of that nature? Lenny, you probably have a pretty good feeling about this anti Semitic stuff. How do you think about
Yeah. My wife and I speak about that all the time. My wife is Jewish, and she herself has a great amount of fealty towards, Jews in general and against like hatred against Jews. But I think there are ways in which we see anti-Semitism, right? That we see like anti-Semitic tropes that go back hundreds of years, the blood libel, right? Calling Jews Christ killers, those sorts of like casual anti-Semitic elements. And I feel like there are people who are unfairly and being very rhetorically duplicitous in kind of lumping all good faith criticism under a bad faith moniker of anti-Semitism. I think this is really a clash between like a good faith argument and a bad faith argument. And unfortunately, the bad faith argument seems to have, definitely got the upper hand in the wake of October 7th.
in that you can go ahead and criticize the Netanyahu government in its treatment by claiming it's anti-Semitic, or how did that good faith bad faith argument thing play out in terms specifically in the treatment of the Palestinians?
Well, the good faith argument, of course, is that one can both be horrified by the works of by the actions of Hamas there on October 7th and still believe that the Israeli government, especially in the passage of time, has done not only a response, but too much of a response, or a response that actually is has now very little to do with responding to the Hamas thing and actually, either getting revenge or putting through a policy of ethnic cleansing. And for people to point that out and to bring that up as a point, a bad faith actor will then claim that any kind of criticism means that they believe that, that person believes that Hamas was correct, or that, or that, or any other thing that they would like to paint that person with.
Yeah, okay. Doug, how do you see all that?
Well, it strikes me. I have an awful lot of Jewish friends and big Jewish community in Baltimore, and by that definition, half of the Jews I know are anti-Semitic because they're highly critical of Netanyahu, highly critical of what's been happening there, and you know, it just doesn't make any sense. It's striking to me that the Trump administration would take this position because this is how Trump reasons about it himself, that any disagreement with him is essentially a treasonous act, right? It's an act of profound disloyalty. You can't disagree with him in any good faith way. He doesn't have that category. And I think he's using that same kind of reasoning now, that you either have to be with Israel or against Israel, and he's identifying Judaism with Israel. And there's a tremendous split in the Jewish community about what's going on. As I say, many. I have a dear friend who just died in the past year, who was escaped the Holocaust at age 3 from Vienna with his family, his parents, but the rest of his family was murdered. And he was an absolute diehard Zionist, pro-Israel person, except at this point when with what's happening in Gaza, for the first time he came out and said this is wrong. This is absolutely a corruption of anything reasonable. I don't think he became anti-Semitic overnight by taking that position.
Yeah, he's not anti-Semitic. He's just pro-humanity.
Pro-humanity. And he took the position that Israel essentially, it's terrible for them. It's a terrible public relations move. And they've given up the moral high ground on which the state of Israel was founded. They're essentially reenacting the Holocaust on the Palestinians, and they've kind of lost the moral high ground. And I think that's going to come back to haunt them in the future tremendously.
When you said that anytime anybody disagrees with Trump, then Trump kind of like considers him, the enemy or
Yeah, treasonous
anti-Semitic, whatever.
essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think Netanyahu follows that same model, the same character?
Yeah, I think they're remarkably similar people. And like Trump, he's got to deflect away from his own legal problems, right? I mean, he's facing jail if he doesn't keep people occupied with other issues. So I mean, I think the whole war on his part, in part, is an attempt to just keep people away from, he's got corruption charges facing him of considerable magnitude, if it ever gets to that. So I think he's a very similar personality to Trump, except smarter.
Yeah, yeah, quite a bit. After it became obviously clear that Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz had a profound effect on the global economy, the Trump administration's Johnny come lately realization of that reality has him sometimes crying about all of America's former allies betraying him by not sacrificing their sailors and their naval warships in order to open the strait back up. As of this sitting, I haven't seen any European nations or even the Sunni Arab nations Iran has been targeting sending any ships or combat personnel near that strait. How do you assess the international reaction to the American Israeli surprise attack that started the war, along with the Iranian response, Doug?
Well, I think first off, they've all been very clear that none of them were consulted about this. So it was never a joint mission, right? It was done, and it was a done deal, and they were expected to jump in. The second thing to remember is the alliance we have, let's say, with the Europeans, certainly. It's a defensive alliance. NATO is a defensive alliance. This was not a defensive act. This was an aggressive act. There's no reason they should feel obligated to join in with this. I mean, I think I think they thought it was foolhardy, a ridiculous thing to do, and why should they get involved? And I think they're right.
So, with the Article 5, um, NATO proclamation or part of their charter says that you have to defend when you're attacked. That came
Right.
after 9/11, which resulted in the Afghan. And there's
Right.
a lot of like Denmark lost a lot of their soldiers
Right.
in Afghanistan, but not Iraq. Whenever we decided to attack Iraq, that was not a NATO alliance. That was a
Right.
coalition of the willing, but not NATO.
Right, because it was not a defensive situation.
Right,
And
right.
this isn't either. I mean,
Yeah.
we're clearly not. I mean, the notion that we're in some direct threat from Iran is preposterous. Um,
Lenny, how do you assess the international reaction to what's happening here?
Well, this whole thing just um, it points to either the fact that like Donald Trump, who is not notoriously not a reader, did not really understand the whole point of NATO and the obligations of the various countries to each other, in the fact that it was a defensive alliance, or it just shows that a lot of the things that he does are not just impulsive, but he just says that something is happening and then he expects either people to fall in line, right? Or he expects that he can bully people into accepting his truth as the truth of the matter. And I think it's several countries, Germany, England, Spain, have basically said no thanks, and they've been very polite about it. But Trump himself has been contemplating revenge on all of those countries, right? From pulling troops out of Germany and Spain to like I think I heard some ridiculous fever dream that because he was buddies with Javier Milei, he was going to make an attempt to give the Falkland Islands back to Argentina despite England. Um, but yeah, I have a feeling this one, it's very depressing to think that the president's main negotiating tactic is somewhere between uh, bullying and just declaring something to be true, and not really understanding anything about the delicacies of international diplomacy and of building coalitions. And of course, like he can get away with that when he's doing it domestically, but I think he's finding that, it's not that not as easy to do when you're on the world stage.
Okay, I'm going to follow up with this. Then I'm going to have Doug go back on the same question. How do you think that our stat or our the view of America by all these other nations is going to be going forward from this moment?
I feel like Donald Trump is just kind of marching us right off the world stage. I mean, in who is going to get better relations with Gulf war countries when they realize that like they've put their lot in with somebody who is erratic and capricious. China, of course, right? Like there are people who most Americans would consider our political adversaries who are taking who are using our mistakes and moving against us in that regard. So we are not only burning bridges, we are like pushing people who should be allies into the arms or into at least treaties or economic practices with people who we don't wish to align ourselves with.
So, do you think that most of these nations view China now more favorably than they do America?
I think it's one of those things where I guess they're looking for stability, and I mean those a lot of those Gulf War countries don't really care that much about uh, human rights or democracy. So if that's not as important to you as safety and security, and then I guess no.
Okay, Doug, same thing. It's a two-part question now.
Yeah. Yeah,
China
I,
is China viewed more favorably now
I
than
think they're
America?
viewed, I think they're viewed as more predictable, and that's a plus. I think people don't trust them and they're going to be wary, but at least they're predictable and they're inclined to do what they say. So I think that nations are going to be willing to deal with them, certainly economically. And we're seeing that all over the place. Canada, Latin America, you name it, Europe, they're all trying to develop better, be less dependent on us, and wisely so. I think the other thing is that whole notion of, yeah, the Chinese are not great on human rights. At this point, we're not so great either. So I think the difference has gotten considerably less. So I think that argument from the high ground, we've lost that. So I think it becomes a very pragmatic thing. And I think the rest of the world has just decided they cannot afford to depend on us. They cannot trust us. I was very struck by Kerry's comments in Canada that they can't sit out and just hope that the Democrats win the next presidential election. I think what they've decided is we are a fundamentally unstable country. If people can elect Donald Trump twice, who knows? Even
Can't
if
be
we get a
trusted.
good administration next time, 4 years later, they're gonna, it's all gonna potentially change. I think we are no longer seen as a source of stability in the world. And so the world is going to work around us. And of course, his tariffs have done it in the economic sphere. People are, developing trade relationships with one another and leaving us out of the loop. And I think we're just going to get progressively marginalized as a country. I think that's our future.
Diminished respect, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
The most amazing component of this comedy of errors is the nonsensical, erratic stock market, seemingly governed by the wildly fluctuating global price of crude oil. The absurdity of it all is that the market can go up 800 points based on a lie Trump told on Truth Social in the morning, and the next morning, another lie can send it down 1,000 points. So we have a pricing system completely based on which lie is the most recent. I heard today about a rumor that they were going to end the war, and the stock market went wild. Oil prices were going to fall, but then later on in the afternoon, it didn't really happen that way, so it stayed bad. Is it possible to see capitalism and the markets played with any seriousness, given how it behaves? Doug, you already mentioned that it's just a casino. That the
Yeah.
stock market
And
is
I think
a
that's
casino.
something that one needs to understand is that, it doesn't reflect the economic strength of anything. I mean, the people who are playing the market, and I think it's so important to realize they're not playing the way you and I might invest in a mutual fund or something. They're playing the split second to get ahead of the next guy and buy low and then sell high. And they're not looking at the long-term effects. They're looking at what's going to happen. Uh, uh, a very good couple we're very good friends with has a son who actually runs a hedge fund in New York, and he owns a hedge fund. And he moved his headquarters so that his computers could get in several milliseconds faster when he makes a deal than when he was located in New Jersey. It's that kind of game, and it's just gambling. It's absolutely gambling, and it doesn't reflect anything at all. I think it is just its own little casino, and I think it has very little to do with the state of the economy, how solid businesses are, what the future, you know, it's just playing by the second. And so when they want to, everybody wants to get the hint before the next guy. Oh, maybe this is the way it's going to go, and I can buy fast and sell fast and make a few bucks. That's the game.
Lenny, the stock market as a metric of economic uh, as a model of the economy is just ridiculously absurd. Yet it's still used quite a bit. Whenever you see all these shows that talk about the economy on TV, like CNBC is probably the most prominent, but Fox also has its own economic. It's at the bottom of the screen. All they show is what the stocks are doing at that moment. So the idea that lies can dictate how these things go up and down just to me seems the epitome of absurdity. What do you think?
It's I mean, it's one of those symbols that's like well over 100 years old, right? That like the stock market used to be stocks in companies that made things and build things in a quantifiable term, and in terms of that profit of, widgets made or cows milked or Model Ts constructed, one could assign that value in a group as stockholders to that to assign that a value. That hasn't been the case for a while, right? A lot of the
What
stock market
happened?
now
What
is,
what 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 caused that to change, though?
well, I mean, a lot of it is the fact that the American economy shifted from a manufacturing base to a service base, right? And anybody who's listened to the NPR show Marketplace knows that their truism is the stock market is not the economy. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much that is in the economy, especially service related things, especially the power and the value of, say, like of daycare, home care, nursing, medicine. None of that gets taken into the value of the stock market at all, right? And most of the stock market now is taken up with either either gambling, trying to manipulate numbers by milliseconds, or it's rent seeking by people with capital to try to get more capital without actually providing a service, or it's entirely speculative, right? In terms of like this current AI bubble, like putting trillions of dollars of value to things that haven't even paid off yet and may not actually pay off. And I do agree with Doug that like the stock market now is gambling. I mean, like all you have to do is look at the idea of shorting a stock, of making money through someone else's loss.
Right.
right? To say that that's kind of ghoulish, right? And it's devoid of having a sense of real value, right? A tangible value, not only to the company itself, but also to the people, the community, the American community that benefits from that rising tide.
This question follows a timeline. Iran signed the JCPOA in 2015. That was the Obama deal, which restricted its nuclear weapons program for 10 years, allowing virtually unlimited international inspections. Co signers to that agreement included China, France, the UK, Germany, the EU, Russia, and the United States. Without any consultation of the aforementioned signees, Doug, you mentioned this earlier, Trump tore apart the agreement on May 8th, 2018. Okay, that was 3 years after Obama got it put together. In April 2025, negotiations started between Iran and Trump 2.0 on nuclear disarmament. On May 27th, Trump announced they were close to a deal. And then on June 13th, the Israeli and American bombers started the 12-day war. More negotiations on nuclear disarmament began again on February 26th of this year. Within 2 days, Operation Epic Fury commenced on February 28th, 2 days later. Now Trump wants a deal to reopen the strait so only he can have the power to close it. Why would Iran trust anything he says? 3 times is a charm, but going it a fourth time is nothing if not stupid. I was talking to my brother a lot about this, and we both agree that the idea of regime change to end this war will only occur when the regime change happens in America and Israel. Because Netanyahu can't be trusted, nor can Trump be trusted. So why would Iran want to do anything as far as making an agreement with those two nations? Lenny, what do you say?
I mean, this whole thing is just, it's so futile. It's futile because it seems like the Trump administration is preferring to negotiate in public than to actually do the hard work of negotiating in private with people who actually, one, understand negotiations, and two, understand all of the technical elements, which, because basically what this is a nuclear agreement, right? It's not, it's not necessarily a wartime thing. It's a nuclear agreement. So to go, to try to negotiate things without people who understand nuclear science, nuclear proliferation, is just is foolish. And then to think of that you're going to have this big public game of chicken, right? About like, we're, you can't block the strait, we're going to block the strait, or we're going to bomb you, and putting all of this, kind of like chest puffery, like, oh yeah, you do this, we're going to do that. It's futile because neither side is really has any incentive to give in at all. And the reality is that both sides are going to have to concede certain points that are embarrassing for them. So, like, to try to do this in public just guarantees that nothing will happen, and this will continue to just be really scary for everybody else who is not involved.
But you made a point earlier in your discussion there that they're basically too lazy to put together a serious team. What you have is two real estate guys over there that know nothing about the nuclear, the energy, and that's because Trump's too lazy to assemble what is really required to make it happen on a serious basis, right?
Right, and of course, like Iran, of course, is also having its own issues, right? They sent like 80 people over to these negotiations, and maybe like 14 or 15 were actual negotiators, and the rest were members of the Revolutionary Guard who wanted to like put their political or their ideological stamp on the proceedings. So it's not like they're also making some missteps, right? And it's not like people are thinking, oh, how much pain can Iran take? How much pain can the United States take? And both sides imagining what the other one can or can't take. It's just a bunch of sound and fury. and we are all suffering for it. We are all hostages of this ridiculous process.
When you say all, you're talking about the entire planet, basically.
No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, like, we complain about gas approaching $5, but like airlines in Europe are now canceling flights through October because they are running out of jet fuel. Other countries in Southeast Asia, like, have had rationing of fuel. Like, there are uh, uh, prospects of famine because of a lack of fertilizer for the fall planting season. I mean, we are just basically seeing the tip of the pain iceberg for the rest of the country. And of course, like, we have the smug satisfaction of being like two oceans away and somewhat separated, being a wealthy country from these kinds of exigencies. But like, it will eventually become quite unbearable.
Yeah, at least we have fuel here in America because we're the largest producer of oil globally. Doug, you remember, Lenny, you're probably too young to remember that in the 70s when OPEC first put the restrictions on that, we had like, depending on what, if your license plate number was an odd or even number, that you had to go get gas because there were actual shortages of gas
Right.
back then.
You'd
Um,
wait for hours in the line
yeah,
they
you
didn't
think,
run out before you got up to your turn.
yeah, right. You think we're headed for that again?
Could be, could be. But I think I think the notion that Trump is too lazy to put a good team together is not actually the incentive. I think he is hostile to all expertise in every field.
Mm.
Uh, Look at the people he's put in charge of every department of government, right? So you've got some joker running Health and Human Services who has no expertise whatsoever in anything medical and, has this crazy stuff about the vaccines and the other, eat red meat and liver. Every department of government is run by an amateur. And I think Trump feels more comfortable with that because he's an amateur. And we have gutted, the State Department's been gutted. So but even the background intelligence we don't have on what's going on over there. The military, Hegseth, we have to assassinate their best military leaders. They just have to wait for Hegseth to fire them. I'm here. I mean, they don't have to kill him because he's going to get rid of him anyway. So, I mean, we have amateurs running everything. And I think that's what shows. I mean, we don't know how to negotiate. We don't know the background information. I mean, how anybody could have gone into this not understanding that the Straits of Hormuz were going to be used by the Iranians when it came right down to it. I mean, that was such an obvious thing to do, and that they didn't seem to see that coming is, just absolutely remarkable. And he's so confident in his ability to strike deals. I mean, the Persian civilization's been around for thousands of years, and they've been dealing for a long, long time. They can run rings around Donald Trump when it comes to striking deals. I think they are playing him, and I think a lot of what looks like they're floundering around is actually quite intentional. I think they just are dragging it out, letting him hang himself. They have no incentive to come to a quick resolution. And the other thing is, all he's doing is strengthening the power of the regime by, you know, you kill a bunch of Iranians, and they're not going to see us as the good guys saving them from a bad regime. They may hate that regime, but they're going to support it as opposed to the people who are bombing the hell out of all their fellow citizens. I mean, we have made it such they have to support the regime. I think the regime's in some ways in a stronger place now than they were before all this started in terms of popular support.
Yeah, they might not be very liked by their people, but the people see that they're standing up to the people who are bombing the hell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think they look better actually because of all of this. And I think they're willing, and I think this is something Trump doesn't understand. He only understands the personal gain with every deal and every decision. I don't think he understands people who are willing to suffer for their principles. And so he doesn't get it. He thinks they're going to strike a great deal because, you know, so he kills a guy's father and his family and then thinks that guy's going to be now easier to negotiate with as the leader of the country. I don't think so. You know?
That took me right into the next question, so I'm not even gonna go there. He killed his well, actually, it was an Israeli strike
Right. Yeah.
that killed the Ayatollah's family, which included his wife, his sister, her son, brother-in-law, and a lot of other people that he knew that were, he probably had affection for. So the idea that he was going to, the new Ayatollah, that is, going to be nice about talking with Trump and saying, whatever you want to do. Well, yeah, that sounds like great. Trump just had that notion that, oh, well, I'm here, I got to get what I want, so you got to give me what I want, kind of a thing. Sort of tells us how he views human nature, which is very distorted. Lenny, I'm going
I
to
think
have
it's
you chime in on that idea that after this guy um, propagated a war where his family basically was killed in one bombing strike, would be willing to negotiate with Trump.
well, I mean, I don't think we don't want to take it like, like you killed my father. Like I don't think it's a classical like, cinematic quest for revenge as much as it is that we are seeing here, someone in Donald Trump who really doesn't have any principles at all and believes that other people do not, try and negotiate with someone who is a true believer, right? And I think that that connects a lot of things that we're dealing with here. Like when you negotiate with a true believer, it's not a question of like who wins and who loses, because the other person is just thinking along different lines, right? You see that in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You see that here with our own, extreme right wing, like that there are people who are certain that the other side are, are absolutely evil, and it makes them very difficult to come to any sort of, uh, you know, logical, qualified negotiation where people give and take on both sides.
Well, all those years of chanting "Death to America" is kind of like reinforced by what America has done to them.
Well, I mean, Iran, like the United States, is a divided country, right? We are, United States is one of the most heavily religious countries in the Western Hemisphere, right? But we believe in a separation between, church and state and the way power is done. There is a large secular society in Iran. It's a very large country. There's like 90 million people. Many of the people, many normal citizens like are sick of living under a religious regime. The problem, of course, is that in the Iranian government, they have a remarkably repressive system that is not above like killing their own citizens en masse in order to clamp down on any kind of dissent. And unfortunately, I think, Trump certainly took the wrong message from, from that in terms of like wielding power and handling dissent. But I feel like any kind of idea of like bridging that sacred and secular divide in Iran is lost for quite some time now because, the people who write the history are the people with the guns.
That's true. The elephant in the room now is Cuba. Trump's warped perception sees Venezuela as a magnificently successful regime change. Iran isn't working out quite as nicely. Trump may see the need to chalk up another Venezuelan style win. Isn't the Cuban takeover the next logical step? Lenny, are you afraid that Cuba's next?
Yeah, and again, this is like something that they don't really need to do. I mean, obviously they've had this really suffocating blockade that's been going on that has really immiserated the entire population. But when one side of a population has guns and the other doesn't, there's not much that the side doesn't have, right? Other than to put their bodies up against that. And we have had examples of that in world history where people who did not have guns were able to make a clear moral case and change history. We have just as many where those people's lives were just snuffed out by people who did not really care about, the will of all people and just wanted to cling to power. And I mean, I feel like this same mistake that the Trump administration is making is that, like, unlike Maduro, who was like a thorn in people's side and a cheater and corrupt, the Cuban government is kind of collapsing on its own, right? Like Castro is gone, like Castro's brother is basically gone, and it seems like obviously, the embargo had not really done anything, and it seems like Father Time is going to take care of that regardless. Um, yeah, it seems like, if you want to be cynical, maybe it's like a wag the dog kind of distraction. I mean, the communist government in Cuba is really no threat to the United States at all, right? It hasn't been for like 30 years. So it seems like it's one of those things where, again, like a fever dream of a very small group of expatriates in South Florida is calling the shots, or that sort of like again a triumph of a sort of like blind fanaticism over a desire to actually create peace.
Yeah, so it's something that the Trump will do just to get another a win. Just I
Yeah,
did it
I mean,
to Maduro, I can do it to Cuba. Chalk me up as the winning president now.
he can make it part of his legacy, right? I mean, like toppling dictators, acquiring land, and building monuments to himself, that's what occupies him right now. He's obsessed with how history will judge him.
Cuba next, Doug.
Yeah, I think he's almost going to be forced to because he, like you say, he needs a cheap win. He needs an easy, quick win, and that would give it to him. The other thing that I think a lot of these things, certainly in the case of Venezuela, don't forget the economic behind the scenes deals going on with that. Uh, you know, he wants Venezuelan oil. I mean, I think a lot of this is playing to he and his cronies who make a lot of money on these things. And I think that's a big part of the incentive for this kind of stuff. Um, you know, just like his envy over Greenland is because there's a lot of very valuable minerals sitting there that his family will be able to invest in the companies. And I think there's a lot of business deals behind all of these invasions that
Which is
we
why
partially know
Kushner
about.
and Witkoff are the ones that do negotiating.
Right, because they're really looking at their business. I mean, what do they know about negotiating, for
Yeah,
God's sake?
yeah, yeah.
And
Nothing.
the fact that a lot of this stuff is based on Donald Trump being kind of stuck in the 80s, right? The
Yes,
actual ability to revive the Venezuelan oil infrastructure, right, points to the fact that one, it's either a pipe dream or basically it's just like an open sore for which like corruption can seep through because, it's like a recreation of Fitzcarraldo trying to take a steamer like over, through the Amazon, right? We want to have all this stuff good, and what ends up happening is a lot of people get paid and nothing actually gets done.
that's exactly right. Yeah, yeah.
I'm a history repeats itself buff, and I've been making the Trump Hitler comparison since the ride down the golden escalator. So now that the petulant child decided that the best response to not receiving the Nobel Peace Prize is to go full bore into war and war crimes, let's take a quick look at some of the notable reoccurrences. First, Germany. After political maneuvering resulting in the annexations of the Rhineland, Austria, Sudetenland, and Czechoslovakia, followed by the glorious military invasions, which resulted in the conquests of Poland, the Low Countries, and the big prize, France, the big guy was not satisfied. So in the summer of 1941, he decided to invade the Soviet Union and that December declared war on the United States. Oopsie daisy. Now we have the military bombing of the unarmed boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific by Trump's military, along with the military bombing of unarmed, or along with the civilian targets, I should say, in Iraq, Nigeria, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Iran. All those places he bombed. But the big glorious prize this time, like Hitler had in France, was the kidnapping of the Venezuelan head of state, Nicolas Maduro. Our big guy was emboldened, but like his Nazi predecessor, not nearly satisfied. It took very little convincing from his good buddy BB to get a war started with Iran, actually, the second war. Oopsie daisy. I'm not suggesting that history repeating model will have Iran militarily defeating Israel and America, resulting in an unconditional surrender like the one Germany submitted in 1945. But could the fact that the Iranian regime survives, that both nations, I'm talking about Israel and US, endure an embarrassing political defeat by creating an unstable Middle East and a schizophrenic global economy? Could Iran be historically declared the winner if and when the dust settles? Doug, do you think history is going to say that Iran won this war?
I think if the regime survives, yes. I think it will. I mean, I think they will end up ultimately being seen as the victor, just because they started out so much the underdog. But I think the other thing that the other way history repeats itself, of course, is that every major power in world history has collapsed under over ambitious military operations. That's
Talking about Rome, right? You're talking about
starting
Rome.
with Rome, starting, the Chinese Empire did the same thing. I mean, you just see everywhere that the military, as mighty as our military is, it's not infinitely powerful. It's got its limits. I mean, there was an article in the New York Times recently calculating that it's going to take at least 10 years to rebuild our supply of missiles and ammo that we have wasted in this war, right? I mean, could we do anything if China took Taiwan tomorrow? I'm not sure we're in a position to do it. There's a limit. And I think none of these megalomaniac kind of guys appreciate the limit. Hitler didn't, and I think Trump doesn't either. I think Trump thinks he's commanding now an infinitely powerful military that can just do anything it wants to do everywhere and anywhere. And that's just not a fact. We're going to end up overextending, and it's going to get us at some point in one way or another. I don't see any way around that.
Lenny, Doug thinks that Iran could win this war. What do you think?
Yeah, and in this sense, I feel that the parallel is not to World War II, but actually to the Vietnam War and the war in Afghanistan, where we are think in our hubris that we can go in and take over and come up against a band of ragtag fundamentalists and true believers who understand that all they have to do is not lose, and they win. Because then for them the winning is not a military victory, it's a victory of propaganda, it's a political victory.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Doug had mentioned that Trump is not does not appreciate expertise, and of course we can see that he believed that the Nicolas Maduro thing was great because, like, nobody ever thought about doing that before. And he thought that he could do that same kind of element in Iran and be able to confidently claim that, like, oh yeah, I did what seven presidents couldn't do. And now for once he's realizing that, like, yeah, that's not going to be true, because if he had listened to experts, they would have said immediately that the first thing Iran would do was close the Strait of Hormuz. And now he's realizing not only has he fallen into the trap that seven previous presidents did not fall into because they listened to their experts, but now he's faced with the fact that, unlike, say, like his tariffs or other things domestically, he can't just say that the war is over, because there are two people in a war, right? So if he says, oh, the war is over, now we're going to be escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz, and then what happens 24 hours later? They have to suspend that because, oh, yeah, the Iranians are actually going to shoot at people who are trying to go through the Strait of Hormuz, right? It takes two people to end a war. And I think right now he's under a lot of stress, and he's finding out because, of course, like with his personality, there is no possible way that he can be wrong, and that he can admit that he made a mistake, right? And he can't look weak, so he is his worldview is becoming more and more constricted as the reality is there, and at a certain point he's not going to be able to convince people that what he is saying is the truth, because people are going to know the truth at the gas pump. They're going to see the truth, like on videos, and he's not going to be able to spin it any further.
Yeah, Rubio said that Epic Fury's over now. Project Freedom is underway, and then within like 12 hours, they said Project Fury's on hold, or Project Freedom is on hold. Yeah, I have to disagree with one thing you just said about Trump's realizing he doesn't realize shit. He's just not he's not capable of realizing that. Anyway, first disagreement of the evening. The end of World War II resulted in America becoming the unquestioned leader of the free world. In the 80 plus years since that ascendancy to where we are today, there has been any change in that status. Is there? I guess we said earlier there is significant change in that status. Can you trace any evolutionary development in that period? Or could you also assess how the rest of the planet's population, I'm not talking about the governments, I'm talking about the people, views America at this moment? Have you seen it like a gradual erosion of the belief that America is the leader of the free world, Lenny? Or is that just something that just bang, Trump shows up and now we don't have that anymore?
I mean, it's interesting because I grew up in a time where America's primacy as the world's policeman was unquestioned, right? Just the same way as like for young Israelis or Zionists, the fact that Israel would exist as a place for Jews to be was it was unquestionable. It was a tautology. It was the way things were. It was the way the universe was. I grew up in a time when, we even claimed that there was that history was over because we had won. We had won the Cold War. And as an American, we grew up understanding that that America was powerful, but it used its might for good. It used its might for justice, right? You know, like a like a manifestation of a kind, benevolent Superman with our red, white, and blue. Um, but unfortunately, most of the that moral high ground has been chucked, right? Like all the elements of our soft power in the State Department, USAID, all of the things that like were a benevolent good for the world that people could say the US helped us with this are kind of gone. And thinking about what Doug said about how empires crumble, I feel like we are seeing now what is happening when a nation thinks that it has no limits, right? That it has thinks that it has no limits on its power, right? I mean, this is what Israel is seeing right now, right? But with Israel, there are limits on its power, and the limits on its power come from Washington, D.C. to tell it when it's gone too far. But there's no one to tell the United States when it has gone too far and the limits on its power. We unfortunately also have a bunch of politicians now who have completely confused the idea of power with the idea of governance, right? That their complaint was that nothing got done in the United States in the Congress because people did not know how to wield power to get things done. Well, the reality, of course, is for things to get things done, people need to treat the job of politics seriously and realize that the job of politics is compromise in order to get things done. And
For
just
the common
the
good, for the common
right
good, not
and
for your
just
own
to
enrichment.
right and just to wield power, we're finding out that like all we see are the excesses of that, right? Whether it be through our weird love you hate you diplomacy, or with with the extravagant violence of ICE and Border Patrol, to the hubris of our military organizations shutting out the press. Um, all we see is the wielding of power, and we don't actually see that power coming to anything. So we're left with the fact that, like, yeah, it seems like instead of wielding power to get things done and to govern, we're just wielding power to enjoy that feeling of power, right? We enjoy the idea of like being in politics as opposed to the actual work of politics, which is tough and boring and requires compromise. And if you're a true believer, like compromise is anathema.
So the goal is not governing, the goal is the power.
Right. Why else would we have all of these states suddenly redistricting in order to preserve minority representation for for the foreseeable future?
Okay, Doug, America's
Yeah.
status.
Well,
I mean, I think you guys both, and all three of us agree that it is diminished
right. But I
substantially.
think the beginnings go back much further. My own feeling is that I think we got the wrong message from the fall of the Soviet Union.
Hmm.
I think we saw it as we won
Yeah.
rather than a world order where that it's under the control of a couple superpowers is no longer how the world works. They just happen to fall first. I think it's not that we won. I think the globalization and technological changes have made it such that a a considerably less affluent country can build a bunch of cheap drones, have a few excellent hackers and a little bit of good AI, can compete with us militarily, economically, everything else. I think what's happened is over the years, we maintained our position in the world, much as Lenny indicated, by a certain perception of goodwill that we represented to the world democratic values, trying to be helpful to other countries, doing our thing. And that kept us in a place of considerable respect in the world and gave us a lot of soft power,
Hmm.
even though we could no longer enforce it in a hard way. And now you've got an administration who wants to do everything with hard power, and it ain't there. And I think that's both true in domestic politics. I think what Lenny said is absolutely correct. I mean, the notion of government by compromise, where everybody realizes you get some of what you want and you give some of what the other guy wants, that's how things get done. That's just seen as weakness now. And so domestically, I think we're in trouble. But I think that approach internationally has taken all the goodwill away. And I don't think we have anything to back it up with. I think, it's going to rapidly, we're just going to be another, second-rate power, and the world's going to go on without us.
I've been fantasizing for a long time of putting you two together on a panel for this show, and I got to tell you, you guys made that reality tonight, and I'm just so pleased. And I'm definitely going to have you two together again in the future. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.